Pentagon clears Tomahawk for Ukraine, leaving final call to Trump, CNN reports. So now we are in a situation in which Trump has actually made a move. Trump has been irritated enough with the stance of Russia that he has actually imposed sanctions, which is a great first step. But if he actually agreed to give the Tomahawks to Ukraine, that could actually be another great gesture of cooperation between the US and Ukraine. Because it feels like there's been a lot of argumentation that the US has a limited amount of systems itself, that it needs them. But it seems that Pentagon does not agree. I'm not sure I buy this argument, considering that the United States has, at the end of the day, the most powerful army in the world by far. I don't think that the might of the United States Army is entirely reliant on those systems in particular. I actually think that the United States, at the end of the day, might have even more powerful things at its disposal. The Pentagon has cleared the transfer of long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, leaving the final decisions in the hands of the US President Donald Trump. CNN has reported. I have questions about this, like right off the bat. I have questions. How many systems did the Pentagon clear to be transferred? How many missiles? Because that makes a great difference. It makes a difference between it being a symbolic gesture and it actually making any difference on the battlefield, which I do care for the missiles to actually make a difference in the war. I would like them to make a difference. The broadcaster said on Friday, citing 3 US and European officials familiar with the matter, that the Joint Staff delivered its assessment to the White House earlier this month after concluding that supplying the missiles would not harm US stockpiles. So that argument just is thrown out the window. Because I've been hearing this argument from a lot of people, including people that I really respect when it comes to the topic. So it added that the assessment was conveyed before Trump met with Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky, who had hoped to secure the missiles that Kyiv argues could significantly shift the balance on the battlefield, which means that it does not mean anything. If Trump has already been praised by the Pentagon on this issue before his meeting with Zelensky, then that means that the Tomahawks are, in practice, still off the table. That is what I'm hearing from this little bit. So nothing changes. Nothing really ends up changing. In reality, nothing changes. It added that the assessment was conveyed, blah, 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 shift the balance. According to CNN, the Pentagon's assessment initially raised hopes among European allies that Washington might soon approve the transfer, as it removed one of the administration's main objections, concerns over America's own limited stockpiles. Before he met with Zelensky, Trump himself said that the US has a lot of Tomahawks it could potentially provide to Ukraine, reflecting his growing frustration with Russia's reluctance to pursue a ceasefire agreement. However, during his meeting with the Ukrainian leader, Trump appeared to reverse course, claiming that the US needed the weapons in its arsenal and that he hoped the war could be ended without having to supply them, which, as always, directly contradicts the expert's opinion on these matters. But I think we have come to be used to Trump just saying whatever the hell he wants and not caring about what the experts in the field think of such matters, right? I think they're just par for the course at this point, isn't it? Before he met with Zelensky, Trump himself said that the US has a lot of Tomahawks it could potentially provide to Ukraine, reflecting his growing frustration with Russia's reluctance to pursue a ceasefire agreement. However, during his meeting with the Ukrainian leader, Trump appeared to reverse course. We read. Trump's change of tone, which came as a surprise to Kyiv and its European allies, followed a phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin a day earlier. Trump acknowledged that Putin did not like it when he mentioned the possibility of sending Tomahawks to Ukraine during their conversation. Why does Ukraine seek Tomahawks? Kyiv has long urged Washington to supply the long-range weapons combined with Ukraine's domestically produced drones, the Tomahawks, which have a range of between 100 and 1,600 and 2,500 kilometers, could deliver powerful strikes against Moscow's military infrastructure, allowing Kyiv to hit targets deep inside Russian territory. Zelensky has argued that such capabilities would strengthen Ukraine's negotiation position and compel Putin to take Trump's calls for peace more seriously. The greater the Ukrainian long range capability, the greater the Russian willingness to end the war, he said last week. According to the Washington based Institute for the Study of War, the Tomahawk's range and payload would allow Ukraine to inflict significant damage on critical Russian assets far beyond Kyiv's current strike limits. The think tank estimates that at least 1,655 Russian military targets could fall within range, including 67 air bases and other facilities vital to Moscow's war operations in Ukraine. Will Trump give the green light? Who knows? Trump's policy on Russia's war in Ukraine has shifted continuously since his return to the White House in January. He had vowed to end the conflict on his first day in office, but despite his diplomatic efforts, the war is now approaching its fourth winter, with Moscow defying his calls for a ceasefire. I'm not I don't think so. The fact that Trump has been appraised by the Pentagon on the situation and that he has been told that this would not affect stockpiles and yet refused tells me that they are off the table. That is what that tells me. Effectively, the Tomahawks are off the table for Ukraine. That does not change in the slightest. Last week, Trump imposed sanctions, which imposing sanctions does not mean that there is a higher chance of the Tomahawks being given. I am. It is interesting, and it is actually useful information to know that the Pentagon had cleared the Tomahawks for Ukraine, and that the whole argument of dwindling stockpiles is not as important as mentioned. But it remains true, in my opinion, that Trump will probably not give Ukraine the Tomahawks. So, in practice, this revelation does not change anything. In practice, nothing changes for the better for Ukraine.